She was kneeling in the rain when the headlights found her. The beams swept across the wet asphalt like two cold eyes, slow and searching. Claire Rutledge did not move. She could not move. Her hands were pressed flat against the chest of a man who outweighed her by 150 pounds. A man whose leather vest was soaked through with something darker than rainwater. And behind her, inside a rusted Honda Civic that had no business being on this road at this hour, two babies were crying. Not the soft, rhythmic crying of infants who needed feeding. The sharp, jagged kind. The kind that meant something was wrong with the world. The headlights grew larger. Claire pressed harder against the wound. She had been a courier for 14 months. She had driven through flash floods in the Central Valley and ice storms on the Grapevine. She had delivered sealed envelopes to federal courthouses at 3 in the morning and pharmaceutical packages to clinics that did not appear on any public map. She had learned through necessity and through the particular education that the foster system gives to children who have no one to call, that the world does not stop its business because you are frightened. So she pressed her hands against the wound, and she did not look at the headlights. She looked at the man. His name, she now knew, was Rex Harlan. He had told her that much in the broken minutes after she had dragged him upright from the concrete barricade and half carried him to her car. He was a patched member of the Hells Angels motorcycle club, a sergeant at arms for his charter, a man whose reputation along the corridor between Bakersfield and Fresno was the kind that preceded him into rooms. He was also right now a father of 6-month-old twins who was losing blood faster than she could stop it. His lips were the color of old ash. Rex Harlan opened his eyes and looked at her. He did not say anything. Neither did she. The headlights were close enough now that she could hear the engines. This is where the story begins. Not with the headlights, and not with the wound, and not even with Claire. It begins 90 minutes earlier, with a delivery, a broken app, and a turn onto the wrong road. Claire Rutledge had been awake for 19 hours when she crossed the city limits of Bakersfield. She was 22 years old. That sounds young until you understand what those 22 years had actually contained. She had lived in 11 different placements between the ages of 4 and 18. If you do the arithmetic the way she had learned to do it during long car rides between group homes, it works out to roughly 2 years per address. She did not use the word home to describe any of those places. Home implied a door you controlled. In the foster system, the doors belonged to other people. She had aged out at 18 with a duffel bag, a California state check for $512, and a phone number for a housing assistance coordinator who did not answer when she called. She had found a couch, then a room, then a studio apartment the size of a generous closet on the eastern edge of Bakersfield. Through a contact at the housing office, she had found a job with a premium overnight courier service that paid better than anything else she could have gotten without a degree. The job suited her. It was solitary. It had rules that did not change based on who was in a bad mood. You picked up the package. You delivered the package. You documented the delivery. The package did not ask about your history. The package did not make comparisons between you and other people who had passed through its hands before. Claire had memorized the addresses of every federal building, every major news network affiliate, every hospital receiving dock, and every law enforcement field office within a 100-mile radius of Bakersfield. Not because anyone asked her to, because information is weight and weight is ballast. A girl who grew up with nothing learned early, that the only things truly yours were the things stored inside your own skull. On this particular Tuesday night in November, she had one package, legal documents sealed and expedited, bound for a corporate office on the industrial outskirts of Bakersfield. Her navigation app had been malfunctioning since she passed the interchange. It kept sending her down unmarked access roads and past warehouses whose loading dock lights had been dark for years. The heater in her 2012 Honda Civic had been broken since September. She had a thermos of gas station coffee that was no longer hot. A windshield wiper on the driver's side left a smeared arc across her field of vision every 3 seconds. The rain was not the polite California drizzle she had grown accustomed to. It was a November storm that had no sense of proportion. She was not afraid of any of this. Fear, in her experience, was a resource to be saved for situations that actually warranted it. She turned her high beams on. She took a ride onto what her malfunctioning app insisted was an access road. It was technically, though access to what was difficult to determine in the dark. On either side, corrugated metal walls rose up and then fell away. The road bent left, straightened, bent left again. That was when her headlights swept across the wreckage. A Harley-Davidson Road Glide Custom and heavily modified lay on its side across the road ahead of her. Its front wheel was bent at an angle that wheels are not meant to reach. Oil spread across the wet asphalt, shimmering and iridescent under her headlights. The engine had stopped. The bike was not burning, but the smell of it, hot metal and ruptured fuel lines, reached her even through the closed windows of the Civic. Claire pressed her brakes. The car fishtailed slightly on the wet surface before stopping. She sat for 3 seconds. That is longer than it sounds when every nerve in your body is involved. Then she heard it, through the rain, through the ticking of the Civic's engine cooling, through the white noise of the storm. She heard a sound that did not belong to any of those things, thin and reedy and insistent. A baby crying. Then a half-beat behind it, a second baby crying. Her hand was on the door handle. Before she had consciously decided to move, she grabbed her maglite from the center console. The heavy one. The kind that had other uses besides light. She stepped out into the rain. The cold hit her immediately and completely. The rain soaked through her jacket in the time it took to close the door behind her. She clicked on the maglite and started toward the bike. He was propped against a concrete barricade about 20 feet from the motorcycle. On the far side of it, which was why she had not seen him from the car. He was massive. Not just tall, but built in a way that suggests something architectural about the skeleton. Shoulders that read as load-bearing. His head was shaved close. The patches on his leather vest were unmistakable even in the rain and the maglite beam. The curved top rocker. The bottom rocker that read California. The grinning death head in the center. Hell's Angels. His right hand came up with a revolver in it, black and heavy, pointed at the center of her chest 40 feet away. Even at that distance in the dark and the rain, his hand was steady. She stopped. She raised both hands. Maglite pointed at the ground. She kept her eyes on his face rather than the gun. Not out of bravery, because looking at the gun would not tell her anything useful. His face told her several things. He was losing blood. The left side of his leather cut was soaked, and the darkness of it was spreading. His breathing was audible from where she stood, a wet sound with a catch in it. The sound of a mechanism that is working harder than it was designed to work. His eyes were blue. The pale, washed-out blue of winter sky. They were fixed on her with an intensity that had nothing to do with the gun. She could see the babies now. 2 infant carriers tucked into the span of his arms, shielded by the leather of his jacket and by the broken architecture of his body. Both carriers faced her. One baby, then the other, stared up at her with wide and terrified and blameless eyes. "Step back," he said. His voice was a gravel road. "You step the hell back. I am not here to hurt you," Claire said. She kept her hands where he could see them. "I am a courier. I came down the wrong road. You are bleeding." The revolver did not move. "They," he said. His voice dropped, losing some of its edge to blood loss. "They took her. They shot Dana. They came for the kids." She took one step forward. Just one. Slow enough that he could track it. "Who did she said?" The blue eyes moved to the babies, then back to her. He was deciding something. She could see it in the way the muscles around his jaw worked. The calculation of a man who has run out of options and knows it. The revolver came down slightly. His name, she would learn in the next few minutes, was Rex Harlan. He was 38 years old. He had been a member of his charter for 11 years, its sergeant at arms for 4. That position meant, in the specific language of motorcycle clubs, that he was the man responsible for protecting the group. He had always done it without hesitation and without complaint. He lived in a house on the north side of Bakersfield with his wife Dana and their 6-month-old twins Jake and June. They had arrived 11 weeks premature, spent their first weeks in a NICU, then came home to a house that Rex had spent 3 months making safe. He had a name tattooed on the inside of his left forearm. One word: Dana, in letters that were uncharacteristically careful for a man with that many other markings. He had gotten it the week they married, because he had wanted her name on his skin before he had a chance to talk himself out of anything. None of this Claire knew yet. What she knew was that he was dying, and the babies were not, and that the distance between those two conditions was narrowing. She moved toward him. He did not shoot. When she reached him, she dropped to her knees. She put the mag light on the ground, pointing upward. She pressed her hands against the wound in his side, without asking permission. He flinched. She kept the pressure. The rain came down between them. "I need to call an ambulance," she said. "No," he said. The word came out hard and immediate, harder than anything else he had said. "No cops, no hospitals. You will die," she said. "Garrison," he said. The name came out of him like something he had been holding. "Captain Dale Voss runs the task force. He has people everywhere, at every ER in the county. If we go in, I am dead. You are dead. And they take my kids." She looked at his face. She had spent 22 years developing the particular skill of reading adults who were telling her things she did not want to hear. She had learned to distinguish between the people who were lying and the people who were simply wrong, and the people who were telling her a truth that the official version of events had no room for. Rex Harlan was not lying. There was a USB drive, he told her, in the inside pocket of his leather cut. Everything on it. Wire transfers, recorded calls, names. He had been supposed to hand it to a federal prosecutor at 8 the next morning. That was why Voss had come tonight. That was why Dana had told him to run with the babies when they kicked the door in. That was why he had gotten on the bike. He had been clipped on the highway by one of the task force vehicles. He had made it this far before the bike went down. He told her where to go. A chop shop behind a junkyard on Chester Avenue in Oildale. Ask for someone named Everett. He goes by Patch. former medic. He will know what to do. She looked at the babies, 6 months old, unable to walk, unable to ask for help, unable to do anything except make the sounds they were making. The sounds of creatures who understood that something was wrong with the world and had not yet learned to stop saying so. She made a decision, but first she reached into the outer pocket of Rex's vest, carefully, slowly, making sure he could see exactly what her hands were doing. She was looking for his phone. She needed to make sure there was no one she could call, no contact, who might be closer or faster than a drive to Oildale. Rex watched her. He did not stop her. She found the phone. It was a burner, thick-cased. The screen cracked but functional. She pressed the button to wake it, and the screen lit up. There were no missed calls. There was one notification, a message from an encrypted one-way channel, the kind used for sensitive communication. She would not have known what she was looking at, except that she had delivered packages to enough secure facilities to recognize the interface. She read it. She read it a second time. Dana is alive. Voss has her. Dawn deadline. The rain fell. She looked at Rex. He was watching her face with the careful attention of a man who had learned to read expressions as a survival skill. Something was shifting behind his eyes, some new uncertainty layering over the pain. He had told her that they had shot Dana. He believed that. He had heard it happen, and he had run with the babies because Dana had told him to run. In the seconds he had to process that sound, the sound of gunfire inside his own house, he had constructed the worst interpretation, because that was what the evidence demanded. But Dana was alive. Claire looked at the phone. She looked at Rex. She thought about what it would mean to tell him right now. In the middle of this road, with the wound in his side, and the babies crying and the night closing in from every direction. She thought about what it would mean not to tell him. Dana is alive, she said. Voss has her somewhere. There is a deadline at dawn. Rex Harlan went very still. She watched him process it. Not with relief. Not immediately. The human brain, when it has already constructed grief, does not simply erase it upon receiving contradictory information. It holds both states simultaneously, the loss and the reversal of the loss. The suspension between them is its own particular kind of pain. She watched him hold both of those things at once. Then something in his face hardened. Not hardened the way grief hardens. Hardened the way purpose does. Chester Avenue, he said. Go. Getting him into the car was not elegant. She was 5'4" and 130 pounds. He was considerably more of everything than that. And he had a hole in him that made the whole operation structurally complicated. But she had spent 14 months of overnight shifts lifting packages that were heavier than they looked. More to the point, she had spent 22 years solving problems that no one was gonna solve for her. So she got her shoulder under his arm, her feet set against the wet asphalt, and she stood up. He used his legs, barely, but enough. They moved together in a sideways stagger, 20 feet to the Civic. It felt like considerably longer. She got him into the back seat. He left blood on the door frame, the seat, the armrest. She did not think about that. She went back for the carriers. Each one was heavier than she expected, solid and real. She ran with one in each arm through the rain back to the car and loaded them in on either side of Rex. He had already gotten his arms around the carriers the reflexive way of fathers, the way that does not require conscious thought. He said, "Hold them secure." She said, "Hold on." She got in the driver's seat. She did not turn on her headlights. She could hear beneath the rain the first suggestion of engines somewhere behind her. Not the Harley. Something else. Multiple somethings. She pulled out of the pool of light the maglite was still making on the road, turned left off the pavement into a narrow alley between two warehouses, drove 30 yards in, killed the engine. Total silence in the car. The rain on the roof, Rex breathing. "Quiet," she said. "Keeping them quiet." Rex pressed his face close to the carriers. He said something to the babies in a voice too low for her to hear. Whether it was the voice or the presence, or some infant intuition about the gravity of the moment, Jake and June went silent. 20 seconds later, 3 black SUVs rolled past the alley entrance. No lights. Moving fast. They stopped alongside Rex's bike. Claire watched through the side mirror. 4 men in tactical gear got out. One of them was taller than the others. He moved with the deliberate authority of someone accustomed to other people adjusting their positions to accommodate his. He wore a dark overcoat. A badge hung from a chain around his neck. That, Rex said from the back seat, is Captain Dale Voss. She watched Voss crouch beside the blood pooled under Rex's bike. He stood. He moved his flashlight slowly across the road surface, reading the scene, the way a hunter reads a trail. Then he said something to the men around him. They got back into the SUVs. The SUVs moved off down the road in the direction she would have gone if she had kept driving. She gave it 3 minutes. She counted. Then she started the Civic and pulled out onto the road. The drive to Oildale took 31 minutes. She kept her headlights off until she reached the main highway, running on ambient light and memory. The Civic's engine was not built for the kind of urgency she was asking of it. The speedometer climbed to 82 and stayed there. Rex talked to keep himself awake, and she let him. He told her that Jake had his mother's temper, which meant he had opinions about everything, and was not shy about communicating them. He told her that June liked the sound of a motorcycle engine, that it put her to sleep faster than anything else they had tried. He told her that Dana made coffee strong enough to dissolve a spoon, that this was one of the things he had noticed about her first watching her drink a cup of it in a diner outside Fresno 8 years ago, and show no visible reaction to a beverage that would have felled a lesser person. He said this last part quietly, then did not speak for a while. Claire said, "Tell me about the route." "Chester Avenue," he told her. She filed the directions in the part of her brain that was good at spatial memory, the same part that had memorized delivery addresses across 3 counties. He said, "Why did you stop tonight?" Most people would have kept driving. She thought about that for a moment. She said, "I heard the babies first." He did not respond. But in the mirror, she could see that he had closed his eyes. His mouth had shaped itself into something that was not quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one. She took that to mean that he understood exactly what she had said. It was not just a statement about the sequence of events. It was something else. Something about the particular effect of hearing a child in distress when you are a person who knows what it is to be a child in distress. She took the Oildale exit. Chester Avenue ran through a neighborhood of salvage yards and light industrial lots, built for one economy and inherited by another. She followed Rex's directions through a maze of stacked car bodies and gravel lots. until the Civic's headlights fell on a corrugated steel garage set back from the road. Its roll-up door was closed. A single light burned inside, visible as a thin yellow line under the door. Rex told her the signal. 3 short, 2 long. She laid on the horn. For 4 seconds, nothing. Then, the roll-up door began to rise, dragging upward with the mechanical complaint of something that had been opened and closed too many times. And behind it, washing out into the rain-soaked dark, was the white-hot light of a working garage. The smell of machine oil and rubber and something electrical reached her through the Civic's vents. She drove inside. The door came down behind her. There were men everywhere, 12, maybe 15, all wearing the cuts. Some were working on bikes racked along the far wall. Some were not working on anything. They all stopped what they were doing when the Civic came in. The quality of the silence that replaced the sound of their activity was the kind of silence that has weight to it. Claire stopped the car. She opened her door and she got out. The garage had gone quiet enough that ordinary speech could carry. She said clearly, "I have Rex Harlan in my back seat. He has been shot." The men moved. There was a man at the front of the movement, a tall man with a long gray beard, hands that were dark with grease in the crevices of every knuckle. He came around the front of the Civic in 3 strides, wrenched open the back door, looked at Rex for approximately 2 seconds. He said his name without looking up. "Everett Briggs. Everyone calls me Patch." He started issuing instructions in a voice that was calm, the way military brevity is calm. Not the absence of urgency, but its most efficient form. 2 men materialized at the back door and began extracting Rex from the seat with a care that surprised her, given their collective size and the urgency of the situation. A table was being cleared across the garage. Tools scraped onto the floor with no ceremony whatsoever. Claire reached back into the car and lifted the carriers out one at a time. June had started crying again. A thin sound in the enormous noise of the garage. A man appeared at Claire's shoulder. He was enormous in the way that makes enormous seem like an understatement. Tattooed across every visible surface, with a face that looked like it had been in arguments it had not always won. He reached for the carriers. Claire pulled back. The man raised his hand slowly. His voice, when it came, was softer than his everything else. He said, "It is all right. They are family. We have them." She looked at him for a moment. Then she handed the carriers over, both of them, and watched him take them with a steadiness that told her this was not the first time hands that size had held something that fragile. His name, she would learn later, was Roy Mackey. Everyone called him Tank. He had a daughter of his own, 23 years old. She lived in Sacramento and called him every Sunday. Rex was on the table now. Patch had his hands inside the wound in a way that required Claire to look at something else. So she looked at the garage, at the bikes in various states of assembly, at the tools, at the USB drive that Rex had mentioned. She did not yet have it. It was somewhere in Rex's vest, which was now across the garage on a workbench. She turned toward the door. She had delivered them. That was the job. Deliver the package. Document the delivery. She took 3 steps toward the roll-up door. The hand that came down on her shoulder was heavy and unhurried. The hand of a man who does not need to grip hard, because the weight of it is sufficient. She turned around. He was older than the others, not fragile old, the kind of old that has been constructed over decades of specific use. the way certain tools develop a particular character after years of exactly the work they were designed for. He had a gray beard gone to salt and pepper, eyes the color of January concrete, a scar along his jawline that ran from the corner of his chin to the edge of his ear. His leather cut bore a patch above the left breast pocket. One word: President. His name was Frank Cole. Everyone called him Hammer. He said, "Where do you think you are going?" "I delivered them," Claire said. "I do not know anything about gunshot wounds. I drive a Honda." He looked at her. It was an assessment, the kind that takes in many things simultaneously and returns a judgment. She had the sense that the judgment was not yet complete. He said, "You drove my sergeant-at-arms here in your personal vehicle. You saw where he came from. You know who did this. And you are the only witness that did not ride a motorcycle to this location tonight. You leave and you become a variable I cannot account for." "I am not your variable," Claire said. "I am a courier. Tonight, Hammer said you were something else." Behind him, across the garage, she could hear Patch calling for gauze, and something whose technical name she did not recognize. She could hear Jake making the particular sound that meant he was building towards something louder. She could see Tank sitting on an overturned crate with a carrier on each knee, doing something with his enormous hands that appeared improbably to be working. Because June had stopped crying, Hammer was still looking at her. The assessment was not complete. She became aware that he was not looking at her face. He was looking at the carriers. At June specifically. His face had done something involuntary, the way faces do when they are confronted without warning by something that lives beneath the level of conscious defenses. The something passed across his features and was gone in less than a second. But she caught it the way you catch a reflection in a window you did not know was there. She did not know what it meant. Not yet. She said his wife is alive. Voss has her somewhere. There is a deadline at dawn. Hammer said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "How do you know that?" "His phone," Claire said. There was a message. The January concrete eyes moved back to her face. They were thinking now. Calculating. She could see that the information about Dana had changed something in the architecture of what he was planning. Had introduced a variable of its own. He opened his mouth to speak. The phone on the wall of the garage rang. Not a cell phone. A landline. Mounted in a yellow plastic housing next to the main circuit breaker. The kind of phone that exists in garages that do not always want to be found by digital means. It rang twice, 3 times. The garage had gone quiet enough that every ring was distinct. Hammer crossed to it in 4 strides. He lifted the receiver. He listened. He did not say anything for several seconds. His face did not move. This was the face Claire would come to understand of a man who has learned to receive bad information without giving whoever is delivering it the satisfaction of a reaction. Then he held the phone toward Claire. She looked at it. She looked at him. She crossed the garage and put the receiver to her ear. A voice said, "I know she brought him there. I know he is still breathing. Send the girl out. Send the babies out. Give me those 3 things and everyone else in that building walks away from tonight." The voice was calm. The calm of someone who has done math and knows what the numbers say. And what the numbers say is that he holds the leverage. Captain Dale Voss did not wait for a response. He said, "You have 10 minutes to decide," and then he was gone. The dial tone filled the receiver. Claire lowered the phone. Across the garage, Patch was calling for something. His voice had an edge to it that had not been there before, a sharpening of urgency that cut through the noise of the garage and reached every person in it. The bleeding has not stopped, he said. He needs volume. He needs a real table. He is running out of time. Rex Harlan, sergeant at arms, father of twins, husband of a woman who was alive somewhere in the dark with a dawn deadline, was running out of time. Claire looked at the USB drive on the workbench. She looked at Hammer. She looked at the babies. She thought about 11 placements. A phone that rang and rang and rang without answer. The particular quality of silence that belongs to a person who has learned that no one is coming. She said to Hammer, "What is in the drive?" Hammer looked at her for a long moment. Behind them, the garage was reorganizing itself. Men moving with the focused energy of people who have decided that waiting is not an option. Hammer said, "Everything Voss has spent 9 years building. Every name, every dollar, everything. And you were going to give it to a prosecutor," Claire said. "That was the plan," he said. She nodded once. She said, "I need to know if there is a laptop in this building." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because I have a satellite hotspot on my work scanner. And I know the direct email addresses of every FBI field office, every major news network affiliate, and every internal affairs division within 100 miles. I have them memorized. I learned them on the job." Hammer looked at her. She looked back at him. Outside, somewhere in the dark beyond the corrugated walls of the garage, engines were idling. Not motorcycles. The quiet, expensive idle of vehicles that have been tuned for surveillance. Voss had found them. The sound reached them before the lights did. It was the sound of engines that were not in any hurry. A specific and recognizable sound distinct from the engine noise of vehicles that are rushing. Vehicles that rush still have uncertainty in them. The engines outside the garage on Chester Avenue had no uncertainty. They moved at the speed of something that has already decided the outcome and is simply arriving to confirm it. Hammer did not go to the window. He went to the man nearest the security monitors, a bank of 4 small screens mounted on a shelf above the far workbench, and he looked at what the cameras showed him. 3 black SUVs blocking the front gate, one positioned at an angle across the entrance. Impossible to exit by vehicle without going through the SUV first. 2 more SUVs in the alley behind the building. The alley that was the only other way out. Hammer turned to the garage. He said in a voice designed to reach every corner of the building without raising itself arm up. The garage moved. Claire had seen organized responses before, in the particular way that you see things when you grow up in institutional environments and learn early to read the difference between chaos and choreography. What happened in the next 45 seconds inside that garage was choreography. Men who had been at workbenches or standing in clusters moved to positions along the walls. Without being told which positions, metal sounds came from multiple directions simultaneously. The sounds of mechanisms being checked and readied. Someone killed half the overhead lights. The interior dropped into a dimmer register, preserved their visibility inside, made it harder for anyone outside to read the space through the gaps in the walls. Patch did not stop working on Rex. He called out for someone named Carver without looking up. A man appeared at his elbow. Patch gave him a set of instructions. The man named Carver put on a pair of latex gloves and took over the compression that Patch had been maintaining with one hand while his other worked. Patch straightened. He crossed the garage to Hammer in 6 strides. He said, "I got the bleeding controlled, but it is a temporary situation. His pressure is dropping. Without a transfusion, he has hours, not days. We need to move him to the Fresno house." Hammer said, "We are not moving anyone for the next little while." Patch looked at the monitors. He looked at Hammer. He did not argue. Argument was not a resource to be spent on facts that could not be changed. Claire was standing near the workbench where Rex's vest had been placed. She could see the USB drive sitting on the bench beside the vest. Small and black and unremarkable. The kind of object that looks like nothing and contains everything. Tank was still on his overturned crate. Jake had joined June in being quiet. Whether Tank had done something effective or whether the particular energy in the garage had communicated itself to the infants in some frequency that adults could not hear, Tank was looking at Claire across the garage with an expression she could not immediately categorize. He stood and came to her, carrying both carriers with the same unhurried steadiness she had already come to associate with him. He set the carriers down near her feet, crouched beside them, checked each baby in turn with the efficiency of a man who has done this before. He said without looking up, he had a boy. Hammer. Claire said nothing. Tank said, not biological. Foster kid. His name was Aaron. Hammer got him when Aaron was 6 years old. About a year before, Hammer did 8 months for a weapons charge. The charge was minor. The timing was catastrophic. The state pulled Aaron out of the placement while Hammer was inside. Said the home environment was unsuitable given the circumstances. Put Aaron back into the system. He paused. He was adjusting the blanket around June with fingers that were too large for the delicacy of the work, but managed it anyway. Aaron died in a group home in Fresno, Tank said. He was 9 years old. The official cause was listed as an undisclosed medical event. Hammer found out 3 weeks after it happened, because no one considered him next of kin. Claire looked across the garage at Hammer. He was standing with Patch, now looking at the monitors, his profile unreadable. Tank said, he does not talk about it. He has not talked about it to anyone in 12 years. But you walk in here tonight carrying 2 babies and a story about the system failing someone, and you are 22 years old. That is a specific age to Hammer, because Aaron would have been 21 this past April. He stood up. He was very tall, standing up, Tank. Taller than she had registered when he was sitting. He said, I am not telling you this because it changes anything about tonight. I am telling you because you should understand why when Hammer told me you do not leave this building alone. That was not a tactical decision. That was the first personal decision I have seen that man make in 12 years. He went back to his position near the wall without waiting for a response. Claire stood with the information for a moment. The way you stand with something heavy while you figure out where to put it. Then she set it somewhere that was not right now, because right now had its own requirements. She picked up the USB drive from the workbench and held it in her palm. The external doors of the garage had been reinforced at some point in the building's history. The front door was roll-up steel with an interior brace. The rear door was a single steel panel that opened outward onto the alley. Both were now secured. The voice on the megaphone came through the walls clearly enough to be understood. That was the point of a megaphone. Thomas Henderson, the voice said. The voice had the practiced modulation of a man who has used amplification technology enough to know how to make it work for him. This is Captain Dale Voss. We know Rex Harlan is in that building. We know he is wounded. We know the girl is with you. Send them out. Send the children out. This does not have to be a hard night for anyone. The garage was silent except for the megaphone. Hammer did not respond. He turned to the monitors. On the screen covering the front gate, the 3 SUVs had not moved. On the screen covering the rear alley, the two SUVs were positioned so that their headlights illuminated the back door of the garage. Between the vehicles in the whitewash of those headlights, Claire could count at least 7 men in tactical gear. She was doing arithmetic. The front, the back. The side walls had no doors. The side walls abutted the neighboring properties, a tire recycling operation on the left and an abandoned equipment rental facility on the right. Then Patch made a sound. It was not a dramatic sound. Quiet and controlled. The sound a man makes when he has been trained to manage his reactions, and something has nevertheless gotten through that training. He was standing at the near side of the table where Rex lay, looking at something in his hands. He had been moving around the table, checking connections, making adjustments, and he had gone around to Rex's right side, the side nearest the wall. Now he was holding something between his thumb and forefinger, staring at it the way a man stares at something that rearranges the information he has been working with. He crossed a hammer without a word and held it out. It was small, flat, magnetic, designed to adhere to metal surfaces, small enough to be missed in a quick search. A GPS tracker, the kind used in professional surveillance operations, the kind whose battery life is measured in weeks rather than hours. Hammer looked at it. Patch said, under Jake's carrier, in the recess of the plastic base. It was not on the motorcycle. It was not on Rex. It was on the baby. The garage absorbed this. Claire understood it immediately, in the way that she understood logistical problems completely, and without sentiment. Voss had not followed them here. Voss had not needed to follow them. He had tagged the carriers before the operation began, before Rex even got on the bike. He had anticipated the possibility of Rex running, had anticipated the possibility of someone else getting involved, had built his contingency into the infrastructure of the night before the night began. It was the planning of a man who does not leave outcomes to improvisation. Hammer dropped the tracker on the concrete floor of the garage and stepped on it with the heel of his boot. The housing cracked. He stepped on it again. Then he looked up at the monitors. Voss already knew where they were. The destruction of the tracker changed nothing except the future, which was now a closed room with fewer exits than it had appeared to have 60 seconds ago. One of the men near the front wall called out that there was movement at the gate. On the monitor, 2 of the tactical figures had moved from behind the SUVs and were approaching the front door. They were not moving in the way that people move when they are trying to open a door. They were moving in the way that people move when they intend to make their own door. Hammer said, "Nobody goes through those walls without an invitation." He said it the way he said everything, without raising his voice. The men along the walls settled into their positions. Whatever was coming, the response was ready. Claire was still holding the USB drive. She looked at the garage. She measured distances and obstacles with the part of her brain that was good at spatial problems. The same part that had navigated the Civic through a lightless maze of warehouse alleys an hour ago, using nothing but ambient reflection, and the memory of a map she had built from Rex's description. The laptop. Patch had a diagnostic laptop on a rolling cart near the center of the garage, somewhere between her current position and the table where Rex lay. She had seen it when she drove in. It was a heavy-duty model, the kind used for reading vehicle computer systems. It had ports along one side, including a standard USB port. She had her work scanner in the inside pocket of her jacket. It was a Motorola handheld company-issued. The model that included a satellite hotspot for use in remote delivery areas where cellular signal was unreliable. She had activated it exactly 4 times in 14 months of work. She knew how to activate it again, and she had stored in the part of her brain that was good at memorization the direct email addresses of the FBI Regional Cyber Division in Los Angeles, the FBI Field Office in Bakersfield, the network news intake desks at CNN and ABC affiliates in the state, the Los Angeles Times digital tip line and the Kern County Internal Affairs Office. She had memorized them the same way she had memorized every other useful piece of logistical information in her professional life. Not because she expected to need them, because information costs nothing to carry. She needed to reach the laptop. She measured the distance, 22 feet approximately. The garage was not in darkness, but it was in the reduced light of half the overhead's cut. The remaining light pooled in specific areas around the workbenches. Between her and the laptop, there was open floor a rolling tool chest, the back end of a partially disassembled motorcycle, and a space of about 6 feet that had nothing in it at all. Covering that distance while standing upright was not an option given what was about to happen. The front door of the garage came open, not opened. It came open in the way that doors come open when the people on the other side have decided that the door is an obstacle rather than a boundary. A shaped charge placed at the lock housing. A very loud noise. The door becoming something other than a door in approximately 0.4 of a second. The noise of it was enormous. It compressed the air inside the garage in a way that was physical. Claire felt it in her chest and in the cartilage of her ears. The light from outside came in as a blinding white wall. Every person in the garage became a silhouette for the 3 seconds it took her vision to adjust. 3 seconds is both very short and very long. In those 3 seconds, the men along the walls moved. The men coming through the ruined front door moved. The garage filled with noise of a completely different register than it had contained before. Claire dropped to the floor. She went flat on her stomach on the concrete. It smelled of oil and metal shavings and rubber. She stayed there for a moment with her cheek against the floor, listened to the geography of what was happening above her, the shots and their returns, the positions they were coming from and going to, the places where nothing was happening yet. She crawled toward the laptop. The concrete was cold through her jacket and the knees of her jeans. She kept her head down and her elbows under her. She moved the way she had once learned in a mandatory foster care emergency preparedness course that had been her most useful educational experience to move when the floor was the only safe geometry available. The rolling tool chest was harder to get around than it had appeared from standing height. At floor level, it was a different obstacle entirely. She went around its left side, pressing close to the concrete, came out on the other side into the space behind the partially disassembled motorcycle. She was 11 feet from the laptop. Above and around her, the sounds of the garage continued. She did not try to interpret them individually. She interpreted them in aggregate. The aggregate told her the front of the garage was contested. The rear had not yet been breached. The sides were being used as cover. She moved through the open space in 3 lunging movements, kept as flat as possible. She arrived at the rolling cart, her right shoulder hitting the cart leg hard enough to move it 6 inches across the floor. The laptop was open. Its screen showed a vehicle diagnostic interface meaningless to her. She reached up and plugged the USB drive into the port on the left side panel. Pulled the work scanner from her jacket pocket. The scanner took 11 seconds to boot. She knew this. She had booted it 4 times before. 11 seconds was always the number. She counted now. Back against the cart, knees pulled up, scanner in both hands. Activating the satellite hotspot required navigating 3 menu levels. She did it without looking at the screen because she was watching the garage instead. She felt the confirmation vibration. Hotspot active. She reached up to the laptop, opened its wireless settings, found the scanner's network in the list, and connected. The connection took 4 seconds. She opened the email client that Patch had open in a minimized window at the bottom of the screen. The email client was logged into a club address. She did not have permission to use it. She was going to use it anyway. She attached the contents of the USB drive, which had auto-populated as a folder on the desktop when she plugged it in, and she began typing addresses into the recipient field. She did not type them from a list. She typed them from memory. FBI Cyber Division, Los Angeles Field Office, FBI Bakersfield Resident Agency, the CNN National Intake Desk, and the Los Angeles Affiliate, the LA Times Digital Investigative Tip Line, a BC News intake, the Kern County Internal Affairs General Submission Address, the California Attorney General Digital Evidence Submission Portal. She typed without stopping. She hit send. A progress bar appeared. She watched it. 12%. From the front of the garage, something shifted in the audio geography. The positions of the sounds changed. The men coming through the door had gained ground. She pressed her back harder against the cart and watched the progress bar. 29%. A piece of the workbench above and to her left disintegrated under an impact. She felt as much as heard. She pulled herself tighter against the cart, watched the progress bar, did not move. 44%. Across the garage, she could hear Tank's voice, not the words, but the tone. The specific tone of a very large man telling something to remain calm. He was with the babies. The babies were still in the garage. That was a fact she could not afford to think about in detail right now. 61%. She heard Hammer's voice from somewhere to her left, giving instructions to someone she could not see. His voice still carrying that quality of controlled authority. The voice of a man who has decided that his particular job is to remain the most certain thing in an uncertain room. 77%. Then she heard something else, a sound she had not heard yet in the garage that night. It did not belong to any of the categories of sound she had been tracking. It was quiet, deliberate. The sound of someone moving very carefully across the garage floor in a specific direction, using the noise of the firefight as cover, timing each footfall to coincide with the peaks of the surrounding noise. The sound of someone who was good at moving without being heard. Claire kept her eyes on the progress bar. 89%. She was aware in the most peripheral register of her awareness that the space behind her was occupied. That something had come to stand in the several feet of garage floor that separated the cart from the back wall. That it had been there for a few seconds, long enough to see what she was doing, long enough to read the laptop screen, long enough to understand. 94%. The voice came from directly behind her. It was the megaphone voice without the megaphone quieter but recognizable. Still with that practice modulation. Still with the quality of a man who does not traffic in uncertainty. Captain Dale Voss said, "You should have just kept driving." Claire watched the progress bar. 97%. She did not turn around. She heard him shift his weight a small adjustment. The kind a person makes when they are deciding whether to act immediately or in the next moment. She understood that the decision was being made on the basis of what the laptop screen was showing him. 98%. She heard him move. The beginning of a step. Then a second sound from a different direction from the left, from somewhere near the rear wall. This sound was faster and lower. Voss heard it too. She heard him turn toward it, 99%. She turned and looked at him. He was standing 6 feet from her, taller in person than he had appeared on the monitor screens. His face was composed in the specific way of people who have trained themselves out of readable expressions as a professional habit. He was holding a tactical rifle at his shoulder. For approximately 1 second, he was looking not at her, but at the source of the sound from the left. In that second, his eyes moved. His weight shifted. The rifle moved with him. The progress bar reached 100%. Message sent. Voss looked back at her. He looked at the laptop screen. He read what it said. She watched him read it. She watched the composition of his face as he processed what the screen was telling him. The way a very controlled man processes information that represents the boundary between the life he has built and the end of it. He lowered the rifle toward her. He said, "It does not matter. Nobody acts on an anonymous email in the middle of the night. Claire said I included the physical address of this garage. The name of every member of your task force is listed in Rex Harlan's files and the account numbers for 9 years of wire transfers to offshore accounts. It is not anonymous. It is the most comprehensively documented anonymous email anyone has ever sent." Voss was quiet for a moment. He was a very intelligent man. He had operated for 9 years inside systems that rewarded intelligence and punished visibility. He was currently calculating whether the send confirmation on that laptop screen represented actual exposure or manageable exposure. The calculation was taking longer than it should have, which meant the answer was not coming out the way he wanted it to. He raised the rifle again. Behind him, from the rear of the garage, there was an explosion, not the shape-charged compression of the front door coming open. This was larger. It came from a different vector. What it produced was not an opening in the existing wall, but the effective removal of a significant section of it. The corrugated steel peeled outward as though something very large and very fast had decided the wall was a suggestion rather than a fact. Voss turned. The men who came through the opening in the rear wall were not task force. They were not tactical gear and dark overcoats. They were leather and denim, and the kind of physical confidence that comes from having been for many years the most dangerous people in most rooms they entered. Claire did not know later how they had known to come. She would learn in the days that followed that Hammer had activated a network that stretched across 3 chapters and 2 states. The call had gone out in the first minutes after Voss's megaphone speech. Motorcycle clubs have communication architectures that do not depend on cell towers or digital networks, or any infrastructure that a corrupt task force captain could monitor or intercept. She would learn that 31 men had ridden through the rain from 3 different directions. They had come in from the rear alley while Voss's attention was fixed on the front. Tank had used a shaped charge of his own sourced from the 3rd shelf of a supply cabinet in the back corner of the garage, on the section of rear wall that had the fewest vehicles and personnel behind it. She would learn all of this later. Right now, she saw the wall come open and the men come through it. She saw Voss make the calculation that a man in his position makes when the room changes this completely and this suddenly. She saw him determine that the calculation had come out the wrong way. He looked at her one more time. She looked back at him. He said, "This is not finished." She said, "You sent everything you had tonight, and it was not enough. You planned for a motorcycle, and you got a Honda. The finished part is the part you built. Tonight is just the accounting." Voss held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he lowered the rifle to the floor. He raised his hands. He turned toward the men coming through the rear wall. Hands raised, face composed, and his 9 years of construction went to rubble around him with the same quiet discipline with which he had built it. From somewhere outside, breaking through the noise and the voices and the settling sounds of a building that has been through a great deal in a short time, Claire heard sirens. Not one siren, not two. The layered, overlapping wail of multiple vehicles approaching from multiple directions. The specific symphony of a response that has been triggered not by a phone call or a radio dispatch, but by an automated alert from a receiving system that had gotten something large and urgent and comprehensively documented dropped into it without warning. The FBI Cyber Division in Los Angeles had a monitoring protocol for submissions that exceeded a specific threshold of evidentiary weight. She had not known this for certain. She had bet on it. The bet had paid. Hammer appeared from the front section of the garage, moving through the changed geography of the space with the same unhurried authority he had carried since she met him. He looked at Voss, hands up, rifle on the floor. He looked at Claire sitting against the diagnostic cart scanner in her laptop above her head, showing a sent message confirmation. He looked at the laptop screen for a long moment. Then he looked at her. She said, "The drive is sent. Multiple recipients. Federal Media, Internal Affairs. Simultaneous delivery." He said nothing immediately. He was reading her face the way she had been reading faces all night, looking for the thing behind the thing that was being presented. She had the impression that he found it. He said, "There are going to be a lot of people in this building in the next few minutes who are going to want to talk to you." She said, "I know." He said, "Are you going to be all right with that?" She thought about 11 placements, the particular education of people who learn early to account for themselves in rooms designed for other people, the memorized addresses of every federal building within 100 miles, the satellite hotspot she had activated exactly 4 times and never expected to need the way she had needed it tonight. She said, "I am a courier. I know how to document a delivery." From the table across the garage, Patch called out that Rex's pressure had stabilized. "Not good," he said. "Not going backward either. He needs the Fresno house and he needs it before morning." From near the rear wall, Tank called out that Jake was asleep. He said it in the specific tone of someone reporting a small victory in the middle of a large war. The only tone available for that kind of news. Exactly the right one. June, as though she had been listening for her brother's status, made a small sound and then was quiet. Outside, the sirens were very close now. Red and blue light pulsed through the gaps in the corrugated walls, painting everything inside in alternating colors. The whole garage looked like something caught between 2 states, between what it had been an hour ago and whatever it was in the process of becoming. Claire Rutledge sat on the floor of a garage in Oildale, a USB drive in one hand, a satellite scanner in the other. She watched the light move across the walls, and she waited. She was good at waiting. She had been practicing it for 22 years. The first federal agent through the garage door was a woman in her 40s, vest that said FBI in yellow letters, the expression of someone who has been awake for a long time and expects to be awake for considerably longer. She took in the room in the practiced way of someone whose job requires rapid assessment of complex scenes. What she saw was, by any reasonable measure, a great deal to take in. She saw a man on a makeshift surgical table with a former combat medic working on him. She saw approximately 20 members of a motorcycle club in various states of readiness, several of whom were in the process of lowering weapons to the floor. with the careful deliberateness of people who understand the geometry of the moment. She saw a man in a tactical overcoat with a badge around his neck, standing with his hands raised and his face composed. She saw a large man sitting on a crate holding two infant carriers. And she saw a young woman sitting on the concrete floor next to a rolling diagnostic cart, holding a handheld scanner and looking at the incoming agents with the calm of someone who called this in and has been waiting for the response. The agent went to Voss first. Voss was the variable with the most immediate consequence attached to it. Two of the agents behind her went to the table where Rex lay. Two more went to Tank and the carriers. The rest spread through the garage with the efficiency of people executing a plan that had been generated very quickly from very specific information. Claire stayed on the floor. She was not hiding. She was simply not in anyone's way. That was where she had learned to position herself in rooms full of people with institutional authority. Rooms full of people with institutional authority tend to make faster and better decisions when the person they are ultimately going to want to talk to is not standing in the middle of everything requiring management. The agent who came to her eventually was younger, a man in his early 30s with a notebook already open. He crouched down to her level on the floor rather than standing over her. She noted this. She told him what she knew in the order she knew it. The order that made the most logistical sense, which was chronological. She told him about the road, Rex, the drive, the message on the phone, the USB drive, the satellite hotspot, the email addresses she had used, the sequence of the send. She told him about Voss on the megaphone, Voss in the garage behind her, the rifle, the 1 second in which he looked away. The agent wrote everything down, quickly and without interrupting. The right approach. She appreciated it. When she finished, he said, "You memorized the direct intake addresses for the FBI field office, the Cyber Division 2 news networks, the LA Times Internal Affairs, and the Attorney General." She said, "I am a courier. I deliver to those buildings regularly. I remember addresses." He looked at her for a moment. He said, "You sent from a club email account." She said it was the only open client on the laptop. "I did not have time to create a new account." He said, "That may complicate certain aspects of the chain of custody." She said, "The wire transfer records and the audio files and the financial documentation that were on that drive do not become less true because of the email address they arrive from. You have the drive. You have the laptop. You have the hotspot logs from my scanner that will show the time and destination of every packet of data that went through it tonight. The chain of custody is intact. It just has an unusual link in the middle." The agent looked at her for another moment. Then he wrote something in his notebook and stood up. She stood up too. Across the garage, they were preparing to move Rex. A stretcher had materialized from somewhere. The real kind, not the improvised kind brought in by the paramedics who had come with the second wave of response vehicles. Patch was talking to one of the paramedics in the precise shorthand of two people who share a technical vocabulary and are using it efficiently. Tank was handing the carriers to a female agent who had crouched down and was talking to Jake and June in the low voice that people use with infants when they want to reassure something that cannot understand words, but understands tone perfectly well. Hammer was standing at the edge of all of it, slightly apart, in the way that he stood at the edge of everything close enough to be present and far enough to have the whole picture. Claire walked to him. He looked at her when she arrived beside him. He did not say anything. She said, "They are going to need your cooperation on the financial records. The wire transfers go back 9 years. Some of them will require someone with knowledge of the club's legitimate business accounts to distinguish them from the criminal flow. He said, I know. She said, Rex needs a hospital, not a safe house. The paramedics are not going to let that negotiation go the other way. He said, I know that too. She said, Dana. He was quiet for a moment. The name sat between them with the weight that names carry when they represent people who are unaccounted for. He said the message on Rex's phone said Voss has her. She said Voss is in custody. Whatever arrangement he had for holding her depended on him being free to maintain it. That arrangement is 3 hours old, and it is already falling apart. The FBI knows she exists. They know she is being held somewhere. They have Voss. They have his phone and his chain of command. They will find her. She said it with more certainty than she felt, because the alternative to saying it with certainty was not useful to either of them. Hammer looked at her sideways. He said, You are 22 years old. She said, Yes. He said, You drove a bleeding man and 2 babies through a flooded industrial district in a car with a broken heater and a malfunctioning navigation app, sent classified evidentiary material to 7 federal and media institutions, using a work-issued satellite hotspot, and talked down a federal investigation on chain of custody grounds while sitting on a garage floor at 22. 2. She said, The heater has been broken since September. I have been managing. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile. The neighborhood of one the same way Rex's expression on the highway had been in the neighborhood of something warmer than his situation should have allowed. He said quietly so that only she could hear it. Aaron would have been 21 this past April. She did not respond immediately. She let the statement be what it was. It was not an explanation, and not an apology, and not a request. It was a man putting a fact into the air between them, because the air was the only place he had left to put it. She said, I know. Tank told me. He nodded once. He looked back at the garage, at the organized movement of it, at the infrastructure of a very long night, beginning to resolve itself into something that could be processed and documented and moved through. He said, You have somewhere to go tonight. When all of this is finished. It was not technically a question. She said, I have a shift that starts at 6 a.m. He said, You are not going to a 6 a.m. shift. She did not argue with him. The FBI worked the garage for 4 hours. They documented the contents of the USB drive. Voss's attorney reached by phone at 2 in the morning, advised Voss not to comment on it. For the first time in a long night, Voss took that advice. They documented the physical evidence of the firefight, the entry points, the positions, the materials recovered from the floor. They documented the tracking device that Hammer had crushed under his heel. What remained of it was sufficient for forensic reconstruction. They interviewed every person in the building. They interviewed Claire 3 times, each interview conducted by a different agent, each covering the same material from a different angle. Standard practice. She recognized it as standard practice. It did not unsettle her. It was during the 3rd interview, conducted in a corner of the garage, screened off with portable partitions, that the agent received something on his earpiece and stopped mid-question and listened to it. He said into the air, rather than to Claire specifically, Tell them we are sending someone now. He looked at Claire. He said they found Dana Harlan. The warehouse in which Dana Harlan had been held was a refrigerated storage facility east of Fresno, decommissioned 3 years earlier and sold to a holding company. Its ownership structure, when the FBI began unwinding it in the days that followed, traced back through 4 shell entities to an account that appeared in the wire transfer records on the USB drive. Voss had not improvised the location. He had owned it at several removes for the better part of a decade. She had been there for 11 hours. She was dehydrated. Her left wrist had been fractured during the initial confrontation at the house on the north side of Bakersfield. A fracture she had not mentioned to the men Voss left to watch her, because she had understood early in those 11 hours that the information available to her captors should be managed carefully. She had a bruise along her jaw. The paramedic who reached her first would later describe it as consistent with a single blow from an open hand. She was otherwise, in the clinical language of the medical report, unharmed. She had in the inner sole of her left shoe a phone. It was an old phone, a model 4 generations behind the current one. It had lived in the bottom of a bathroom drawer since she had replaced it 2 years earlier. She had not known when she put it in her shoe during the 30 seconds between the door coming off its hinges and Voss entering her house why she was putting it there. She had known with the clarity that arrives in moments of extreme and immediate danger that the phone was a resource, and resources should not be left where other people could take them. In 11 hours, she had recorded 47 minutes of audio. She had not been present for most of Voss in his operational mode. She had been in a room, but Voss came to that room twice. Both times he spoke. Both times the phone in her shoe was recording. In the first recording, he told her that Rex was not going to survive the night. In the second recording, approximately 6 hours later, his tone had changed. FBI audio analysts would later describe the change as consistent with a man who has received information that has not gone the way he planned. In the second recording, he said, among other things, "I ordered the shot. I made the call. Rex should have taken what I offered him a year ago. None of this needed to happen." He said it to a woman sitting in a chair in a cold warehouse with a fractured wrist and a phone in her shoe. The woman sitting in the chair said nothing, because she understood that the most useful thing she could do with a man who is beginning to talk is to give him nothing to respond to. Dana Harlan had spent 11 years married to a sergeant at arms of a motorcycle club. She understood in the most practical sense how men who believe they are in control of a situation behave when they are in the presence of someone they have already dismissed as a variable. When the FBI agents came through the warehouse door at 4:47 in the morning, she was sitting in the same chair, upright, fractured wrist in her lap, the phone already extended toward the first agent through the door. She said, "I have audio. 47 minutes. He confesses in the second recording. It starts at the 31-minute mark. The agent took the phone. She said, "I need to know if my husband is alive." They told her. She closed her eyes for exactly 4 seconds. Then she opened them. She said, "I need to see my children." The collapse of what Voss had built did not happen all at once, though it felt that way from the outside. From the inside, where the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office and the California Attorney General's Office were working simultaneously. In the days and weeks that followed, it happened in the precise sequence that any sufficiently documented criminal enterprise collapses, in the sequence determined by the evidence. And the evidence was comprehensive. The wire transfers, the recorded calls that Rex's attorney had been accumulating for 11 months, the core of the USB drive's contents. The testimony of 3 members of Voss's task force who, upon being shown the scope of what was documented, made the calculation that cooperation was the better arithmetic. The financial records that linked the decommissioned warehouse and 7 other properties to the Shell ownership structure. and the 47 minutes of audio from a phone retrieved from the inner sole of a left shoe. Voss was indicted on 42 counts. The number would grow. The foster care placement agency, whose name appeared 14 times in the financial records operating under the name Cornerstone Family Services, had placed children in group homes and private residences across the Central Valley for 9 years. It was referred to the California Department of Social Services for emergency review. Its operating license was suspended within 72 hours. 14 individuals connected to its operations were taken into federal custody within a week. The group homes named in the records were inventoried. The children in them were transferred to emergency placements while the review proceeded. It was not a clean process. It was not a fast process. But it was a process. And that was more than those children had had the day before. The name Millbrook Group Home Fresno appeared on the list that an FBI agent read to Claire 3 days after the garage, in a conference room at the Bakersfield field office. With a cup of coffee in front of her that she had not touched. She had been in Millbrook from the age of 8 to the age of 12. She had been transferred to Millbrook from a previous placement in Fresno, and transferred out to a placement in Bakersfield. Neither transfer had come with an explanation. Explanations were not a resource the system allocated to the children moving through it. She had been a file. Files moved when the system decided they moved. She listened to the agent read the name. She said, "How many?" The agent said, "We are still counting. Preliminary estimate is somewhere between 60 and 80 children over the 9-year operational period." She looked at the coffee cup. White, institutional. The same kind of cup she had drunk from in 11 different facilities over 14 years. She was a file in a system that she now understood had not merely failed to protect her. It had, in the specific and documented language of a federal indictment, been partially operated as a mechanism for moving children between placements in patterns that served someone else's financial interests. She said, "Was there a child named Aaron Cole in any of the records?" The agent checked his materials. He said, "Aaron Cole, Millbrook, 2008 to 2010. Transferred to a private placement in Madera County in October 2010. Died in that placement in March 2013. She said, "What was the private placement?" He said it was operated by an individual who has been in federal custody since Wednesday morning. She sat with that. She sat with the specific weight of it. The weight of a name she had never known. A boy she had never met. Who had been in the same building she had been in, breathing the same institutional air in the years before she arrived. A boy who had belonged to a man who could not hold on to him, because the system had decided the timing was not right and the holding was not permitted. A boy whose name was on a piece of fabric, a piece that a 58-year-old man with a scar on his jaw had been carrying for 12 years. She said, "I need to make a phone call." She called Hammer. He answered on the second ring. That told her he was awake, which she had assumed. She did not know if he had slept at all in the 3 days since the garage. She did not think that he had. She said, "I know how Aaron got to Millbrook. I know who moved him and why. The FBI has the documentation. It is part of the indictment. He was moved for the same reason I was moved. For the same reason all of us were moved." Silence on the line. Not empty silence, the full kind. She said it was not because of the weapons charge. It was not because of the 8 months. They would have found another reason. They were looking for a reason. He was on a list before you ever went inside. Hammer said after a long moment, "How do you know?" She said, Because I was on the same list. Different year. Same mechanism. I did not know it was a list until 3 days ago. I thought it was just the system being what the system is. Another silence. She said, I wanted you to know. I thought you should hear it before the news reports start covering that part of the indictment. Which they will. He said, where are you right now? She said, conference room in the FBI field office in Bakersfield. He said, stay there, I'm coming. He arrived an hour later. He came in a truck, not a motorcycle. That surprised her, until she remembered it was November and the rain had not entirely stopped. And some practical accommodations are not statements about character. He was wearing a jacket over his cut. She had not seen him do that before. He looked like what he was, a man who had not slept in 3 days, who had, in those 3 days, made a significant number of decisions in a significant number of meetings with attorneys and federal agents and charter members and the family of a man who was recovering from a gunshot wound in a Fresno hospital room. Beneath all of that, he looked like a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told something about the weight that changes what it means to carry it. They sat in the parking lot of the field office in his truck for a while. The heater worked. She noted this. He said, Dana called me this morning. Rex is gonna be all right. The doctors said another hour, and the answer would have been different. She said June reached for his hand when they brought her into the room. Rex told Dana that June has never done that with a stranger before. Hammer said, he told me that too. She said she did it with Tank first, in the garage, before everything happened. He said Tank has that effect on people. She said, and it is worth noting that she had not planned to say it, the words arriving with the same unexpectedness as the decision to get out of the Civic 3 nights ago. I want to go somewhere for a few days. I do not have family I can go to. I do not have anyone who is expecting me. I have a studio apartment with a broken window lock that the landlord has been saying he will fix since August. I know that you do not know me. I know that this is a specific and unusual request. Hammer looked at the windshield. She said, I am not asking for anything permanent. I am not asking for anything that needs to be defined. I am asking for a few days somewhere that is not that apartment. He said, the Fresno house has a room. It has a door that locks from the inside. I will have Tank check the lock before you get there. She said, I do not need Tank to check the lock. He said he will check it anyway. That is what Tank does. She said, all right. The Fresno house was not what she had expected, though she was not sure what she had expected. It was a single-story ranch house on a quiet street. A concrete driveway, a front porch that needed painting, a yard that was maintained without being decorative. The inside smelled of coffee and machine oil and faintly the particular smell of a house where babies live. Warm and specific and not unpleasant. Tank was there when they arrived. He had checked the lock on the room as promised. He showed her the room without ceremony. It had a window, a bed, a dresser, and a door that locked from the inside with a deadbolt. He demonstrated the deadbolt. He showed her that the window opened and closed properly. He showed her the bathroom down the hall and the kitchen at the end of the corridor. He said, the kitchen is open. Everything in it is for anyone who needs it. He left without waiting for a response. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. The refrigerator was full. The pantry door was open. She looked at the open pantry door, understanding that it was open because someone had left it open, not because someone had forgotten to close it. The distinction was small, and it was enormous. She had not eaten a real meal in 3 days. She had eaten vending machine food and conference room food and the institutional meals of people whose energy is going somewhere other than attention to eating. She stood at the kitchen counter and ate a bowl of cereal and then a second bowl. No one came into the kitchen. No one watched her eat. No one moved toward her bowl. She washed the bowl when she was finished. She went to the room and she locked the door. She tested the lock once. She turned off the light and lay down on the bed with her jacket still on. Old habits do not dissolve immediately. She looked at the ceiling in the dark and listened to the sounds of the house, the refrigerator cycling on and off in the kitchen. Somewhere distant, a motorcycle engine and then silence. The particular quality of a house at night when the people in it are not hostile. She fell asleep faster than she had fallen asleep in a very long time. Rex came home from the hospital on a Thursday. He came with Dana and with Jake and June and with a left arm that would be in a sling for another 4 weeks. He had a set of instructions from his doctor that everyone in the house understood he was going to follow imperfectly. Dana was wearing a cast on her left wrist that she had decorated in the hours waiting at the hospital while Rex was processed for discharge, with a fine-tip marker in a pattern of geometric shapes. Jake found the shapes compelling enough to stare at for extended periods. The first time all of them were in the kitchen at the same time, the morning after Rex came home, there were 6 adults and 2 infants in a kitchen that was built for a family of 4. Loud and close and complicated in the way that spaces become when they contain more life than they were designed for. Claire stood at the edge of it with a coffee cup. She had been in the Fresno house for 9 days. She had not gone back to the apartment. She had retrieved her things in 2 trips, 2 bags, and a box of books. The sum of what she had accumulated in 22 years of living in places that belonged to other people. Rex saw her at the edge of the kitchen and raised his coffee cup toward her with his good arm. The gesture of a man who does not have a lot of extra words available before his second cup and is using the gesture in their place. She raised her cup back. Dana said across the noise of the kitchen, "He told me what you did." Claire said, "I delivered a package." Dana looked at her for a moment. She said, "He told me all of it. About the road. About what you told him about me. That I was alive. That was the first thing you told him. You did not know him. You did not have to tell him anything." Claire said, "He needed to know." Dana said, "Yes. But you needed to not be involved, and you were already involved, and you told him anyway. Those are not the same thing. I want you to understand that I know the difference." Jake made a sound that required Dana's attention. She turned to him, and the kitchen continued in its particular morning chaos. Hammer was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a newspaper. He lowered the paper when Claire came to the table and sat down across from him. He said, "The Attorney General is holding a press conference today. You will be mentioned." She said, "I know." He said, "There are people who want to talk to you. Journalists. There will be more of them after today." She said, "I know that too." He said, "You do not have to talk to anyone." She said, "I know." He folded the newspaper. He set it on the table between them. He looked at it for a moment, at the fold, at nothing specific. He said, "I called the group home in Madera County, the one where Aaron died. I called it 6 months after he died, and they told me they had no information they could share with me because I was not recognized as next of kin. I called it every year after that for 12 years, and I got the same answer every year. I stopped calling it last January because I had run out of things to say to the same answer." He paused. He said, "I knew that it was the system. I knew that the system did not make exceptions for men with records. or men who rode motorcycles, or men who did not fit the shape of what a parent was supposed to look like. I knew all of that. But knowing a thing and being free of it are not the same condition. He put his hand on the newspaper. He was looking at the fold. He said, "What you said on the phone, that he was on a list before I ever went inside, that they were looking for a reason." She said, "Yes." He said, "It does not undo 12 years. She said, "No, it does not." He said, "But it is different. To know that it was not the charge, that there was nothing I could have done differently that would have changed the outcome, that the reason was not me." She said, "It was not you." He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He put something on the table between them. It was small. A piece of fabric roughly 4 inches by 3, cut from what had once been a heavier material. On it, in letters that had been made by a child, the stitching uneven and earnest and unmistakable in its source, was a single name, Aaron. She looked at it on the table. He said he made it in a craft class at Millbrook. They sent it to me after he died with the other things from his room. The facility in Madeira did not send anything. Millbrook sent this. She looked at it. He said, "I have been carrying it for 12 years. I have not known what to do with it. I thought that the right thing would eventually become clear, and it never did. It just remained unclear, which is the condition that certain things occupy." She looked up at him. He said, "You were in the same building, different years. I do not know what it means that you ended up here in this house, and that Aaron ended up where he ended up. I do not have a framework for that. I am 58 years old, and I do not have a framework for it." He pushed the piece of fabric toward her. He said, "I think he would have wanted someone from Millbrook to have it." She looked at it for a long time. Then she picked it up. It was lighter than it should have been for something that had been carried for 12 years. The stitching was uneven in the specific way of a child who is trying very hard and whose hands have not yet learned the coordination that trying very hard eventually produces. The letters were slightly different sizes. The second A was larger than the first. The O was almost round. She held it in her palm. She said, "I'm going to keep it." He said, "I know." She said, "I'm going to put it on my bag, the courier bag. I still have it." He looked at her. She said, "I am not done with that bag yet. I am going to school in the spring. Criminal justice. That takes time, and it takes tuition, and it takes a job in the meantime. The job I have is the job I have. I am going to keep doing it while I figure out the next part." He said, "The tuition is something we can discuss." She said, "That is a conversation for another time." He said, "Yes." She looked at the piece of fabric in her palm, the uneven letters, the earnest stitching, the O that was almost round. She said he was good at crafts. Hammer said he was. He used to make things for everyone. He made a picture frame out of popsicle sticks for my desk. I still have it. She said, "That sounds like him." She said it before she thought about it. And then she was aware that she had said it. She looked up. Hammer was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Something that had come up through all the other things that lived on that face and was sitting on the surface of it briefly, the way certain things surface and then descend again. He said yes. That evening after dinner, after Rex had been moved to the couch under Dana's supervision, and Jake and June had been settled for the first of what would be multiple attempts at sleep, Claire sat on the front porch of the Fresno house, a cup of tea, the piece of fabric in her jacket pocket. She listened to the street. It was quiet. Not the quiet of isolation, the quiet of a place where people are inside, where lights are on, where things are in their right positions. June had done something that night that she had not done before in Claire's 9 days of observation in the house. During the hour after dinner, when the kitchen was quieting and the adults were moving between tasks in the low-energy way of an evening that has been full, June had been lying on a blanket on the living room floor, doing the things that 6-month-old people do, an ongoing negotiation with gravity and an assessment of the ceiling. Claire had sat on the floor nearby, not for any particular reason, just because the floor was where she was most comfortable in the early evenings, a habit from years of rooms that did not have enough furniture. June had looked at her. She had looked at June, and then June had reached out in the slow and deliberate way of someone whose arm is still developing its relationship with intention, and wrapped her hand around Claire's index finger. She had held it. Claire had not moved. She had not spoken. She sat on the floor of the living room in the Fresno house and felt the small and complete grip of a 6-month-old child who had decided, for reasons that were entirely her own, that this was a thing she wanted to do. She had stayed there until June's eyes closed. On the porch now, in the quiet of the street, she put her hand in her jacket pocket and felt the fabric with its uneven letters. She thought about the particular mathematics of chance and consequence, a wrong turn on an unmarked road in November rain, a phone message she had read accidentally, 11 placements and 2 bags and a box of books, and a satellite hotspot she had activated exactly 4 times. She thought about how things find their way to where they need to go. She thought about delivery. 1 year later, she was in the kitchen of the Fresno house making coffee when her phone rang. She was 23 years old. She had completed her first semester of criminal justice coursework with a grade point average that had surprised her professors and not surprised her. She had kept the courier job 3 mornings a week, not because she needed to. Hammer had made good on the tuition conversation in the practical way he made good on most things, without ceremony, without making it a larger moment than it needed to be. She kept the job because she was good at it, because it connected her to a version of herself she did not want to entirely leave behind. The courier bag hung on a hook by the kitchen door. On its outer pocket, secured with 3 small stitches, she had sewn herself using a needle and thread from a kit she had bought. Specifically for the purpose was a piece of fabric with a name on it in the handwriting of a child. She looked at the bag when her phone rang. She answered it. The dispatcher on the line said there was a situation on Route 99 southbound near the Oildale exit. A child had been found in a vehicle that had been parked on the access road shoulder for several hours. The child was unharmed. Local law enforcement was on scene. The dispatcher was calling Claire because she was listed in the new interagency database as an approved crisis response contact for the Central Valley Foster Care Review Program, a position she had begun 3 months ago as part of her coursework practicum. She said she was on her way. She poured the coffee into a thermos. She took the courier bag from the hook by the door. She put on her jacket. She went to the truck that was parked in the driveway. The truck that had replaced the Civic 2 months ago. The Civic having finally produced an engine problem of sufficient severity to make continuation uneconomical. The truck had a heater that worked. She had checked this specifically when she bought it. She pulled out of the driveway onto the quiet street and headed toward the highway. The morning was clear and cold. The kind of California November morning that comes after a storm has moved through and left everything washed and specific in the early light. The mountains to the east were distinct against a sky that had not yet committed to blue. The highway was not busy at this hour. She set the thermos in the cup holder and drove. She thought about the child on Route 99 southbound near the Oildale exit. She thought about what it meant to be found on a road that someone else had picked. She thought about what you say to a person who has been left somewhere, which is not a thing most people are taught. She knew it from experience, in the most direct and unacademic way. She thought about a man who had carried a piece of fabric for 12 years and had finally given it to someone. About what it means to give a thing to someone, which is that you trust them to carry it forward. She drove south. The exit came into view and she took it, followed the access road to where the lights were, parked, got out of the truck into the cold morning air, bag on her shoulder, thermos in her hand. The mountains still pink on their eastern faces, the highway quiet behind her. She walked toward the lights. She did not hurry. She had learned from the specific education of the past year that the most important thing you can do when you are walking toward a child who has been left somewhere is to walk at a pace that says, I am not rushing because there is nothing to be afraid of anymore. The urgency is mine to carry. The calm is what I bring to you. She walked at that pace. The officer at the perimeter saw her coming and raised a hand. She raised hers. He stepped aside. She walked through. The child was sitting in the back of a patrol vehicle, a blanket around his shoulders, a cup of something warm that he was holding with both hands. He was small, dark-haired, looking at the floor of the patrol car. He did not look up when she opened the door and sat down beside him. She did not say anything immediately. She sat and she was present, which is not the same as speaking. She let the silence be what it was, which was not empty. After a moment, she said, My name is Claire. He did not respond. She said, I drove out here from Fresno this morning. That is about 30 miles. He looked at the cup in his hands. She said, I am going to stay here with you for as long as you need. There is no hurry. Nothing is going to happen until you are ready for it to happen. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, What happens next? She said, Next we figure out what you need. And then we figure out how to get it to you. That is what I do. I figure out how to get things to where they need to go. He looked at her sideways. He was perhaps 8 years old. His eyes were the particular color of eyes that have been watching exits for a long time. She recognized it. She said, I know it does not feel like it right now, but you are going to be all right. He looked back at the cup. She sat beside him in the back of the patrol car on Route 99 in the early morning light. The mountains going from pink to gold on their eastern faces. The highway beginning to fill with the first movements of the day. And she waited, which was the thing she had always been best at. She was not going anywhere.